Hello, everyone. Today we are talking about training frequency and exercise order. So we're going to start to take all these exercises that we've been reviewing, and we're going to look at how to maybe play them out over the course of a week and talk a little bit about how they interact with one another and the stress levels that they put on the body and how to balance that all out to give the most appropriate training load. And then we're going to talk about exercise order, kind of how you pick certain activities to do on a certain day, and how you choose a kind of an order of how to do and when to do those exercises on that day. So for training frequency, we're essentially going to be just talking about training in one week periods. It may be more optimal. It's arguable that it's more optimal to maybe train not restricted to a single calendar week. But what I've seen when I've tried to do that is that you end up running into a lot of scheduling errors. You add a lot more stress to the lifter and to the schedule because you're constantly on a revolving schedule. And if you're not a professional athlete and you have things to do that lay sort of in a 1 week schedule, as in having the weekends off and having big meetings in the morning on Mondays, then training on a single week is just a good way to just keep things simple and stay organized and to help drive and direct some of your training. So when you have no parameters, it's common to fall into something called paralysis by analysis, because if you can train anytime you want, on any day you want, and you're not hindered by any type of competition schedule or life schedule, sometimes all those options actually slow down your ability to make some decisions on how to train and when to train. And what factors are going to affect how often an individual should train? Well, on top of just sort of the life stuff that we were just talking about, on an individual basis, the training status, injury history, goals, sports season, training load and exercise type, and other training that they may or may not be going through. So for training status, we're basically just going to bucket our lifters into about 3 groups of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And the amount of training that they may have gone under for beginners would be 2 months or less, intermediate would be 2 to 6 months, and advanced would be a year or more. And it's definitely arguable. In many circles, someone who's been training for only 1 year would be considered a novice. And in other circles, 5 years of training is just maybe scratching the surface of becoming advanced or experienced. So again, when we're talking about a lot of this strength training and the status, we're not always talking about extreme heavy competitive powerlifters or Olympic weightlifters. So this would be more like we'd bucket our athletes into these categories if they are a non-barbell athlete. And based on those levels of beginner, intermediate, and advanced, you could really be training them 2 to 3 times for a beginner per week. An intermediate lifter could lift 3 to 4 times per week, and advanced lifters could lift 4 to 7 times per week. And the reason that you can get away with a little bit more training for your more advanced lifters is they've been there before. Not everything is so new and stressful to them. So it's all about that Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome, is that those advanced lifters, they've received the stimulus and they've adapted. And so in order to drive new changes, you have to drive in new stimulus. And so having a higher frequency of lifts per week allows you to do that. Whereas the beginner, even if they come out of the gate hot and they're motivated and they're feeling good, that beginner's probably only going to need 2 to 3 lifts per week. And what are the training priorities by sports season? Well, if you've got an athlete with a single sports season, then what you're going to do is classify the rest of their year into 4 seasons. And just like how that 1 week training off of a single week helps us stay organized because of all the other things we have going on in life. For a single sport athlete, training off of 1 year makes a lot of sense too. It helps us stay organized. We're able to put parameters on different timelines. It helps us decide when to emphasize what. So diving in a little bit more, for most athletes, your off season is going to be the right time to have low sport practice and high resistance training. So when, as strength coaches, as exercise scientists, we are stress management experts. So we know that when the athlete is getting stressed intensely outside the weight room, that maybe we don't need to really lay it on thick inside the weight room, and vice versa. If the athlete is not experiencing a whole lot of stress outside the weight room, that's our opportunity to really push them and try to challenge them and stimulate some growth. So our off season, that's exactly what we do. We challenge and chase hypertrophy, muscular endurance, strength, and power. In our preseason, it's going to be kind of medium. So it also depends on your coaches. So some coaches in that preseason, when they get their hands on the athletes, they don't really, it may just be part of the system that those coaches are going to run the athletes a lot. So by getting them in and making them run, let's say it's a basketball team, by making them do a whole lot of running, it's going to build the confidence of the coach that their athletes are in shape, whether that is physiologically appropriate or they follow the proper testing protocols and are following a science-based program. I can't say that, but it's common that coaches will run their athletes and put a high level of stress during preseason. Is that appropriate? I can't say. That's not my role, but I would not assume that it's just a medium amount of stress. I would look into it. I would talk to the athletes. I would talk to the coaches. But from our side, if it is a medium amount of stress or sport practice, we're hoping to get a medium amount of resistance training in as well. And now it's not going to be so strength and hypertrophy based, but more movement specific, really trying to dial in and be specific just before the athletes enter their competition season. And then once we're in season, we can assume that sport practice is going to be high, the stress levels are going to be high. So as exercise scientists, following a logical and rational protocols, we're going to lower the stress in the weight room. And we're really just trying to maintain a lot of the training that's occurred. For younger athletes, it is possible to stimulate and cause growth throughout the season. But once they are maybe halfway through college, that can get a lot harder to do. And also depends on how stressful their sports season is. And some athletes are on a team, might be on a football team, and they don't step on the field all year, while other athletes might be on the football field for every single play the whole year. So it depends on what level you're working with and what sport you're working with and what individual you're working with. And for postseason, it's going to vary. I would say that often for that postseason, sport practice should be down. They should stay away from whatever sport they were just in. And resistance training should also be pretty low. We want our athletes to be recuperating, regenerating, and taking care of things that maybe they didn't get to take care of while they were in season, such as spending time with family and friends and catching up on sleep. And what's common during a sports season for how many times to lift during a week for the trained or advanced athlete? In that off season, again, the sport focus is low and the emphasis on changing the body is high. So how many times are you going to lift during the off season? 4 to 6 lifts per week would not be unusual. In the preseason, as the stress of sport rises and ramps up, the stress in the weight room is going to lower and ramp downward. So we're going to go to 3 to 4 lifts per week. And then in season, I'm really only looking at about 1 to 3 lifts per week. And during that postseason, again, that's active rest. That's encouraging them to do things that away from their sport, possibly away from the weight room. Hopefully not for too long, but knowing that it's time to let the body and the mind heal and to let them sort of breathe a little bit. So maybe no lifts at all and no more than 3 lifts per week. So looking at the exercise training load and the exercise type. So looking at near maximal versus lighter loads, upper body versus lower body training, single joint versus multi-joint exercises. So looking at the amount of stress that we're putting the body under, whether it's muscular, cardiovascular, or neurological, that's going to have a big impact on how often we can train. And looking at near maximal versus lighter loads, I think most people with an exercise science background or otherwise sort of understand that if we're training maximally on a given day, we may need a little bit of recovery time. And what they found is that our nervous system, when we are firing large nerve impulses and really pushing heavy weight in the weight room, our nervous system is going to get sort of overwhelmed, and we'll actually need some time to decompress and clear out some metabolic waste and to return to normal. So for maximal loads and maximal training, if you're in a training phase and you're not competing, so you're not really too worried about how heavy your actual weights are, your concern is that you're just training heavy and stimulating the body. Obviously, you want heavier weights to be lifted because that's indicative of progress and success, but you may not actually be competing. Then maximal loads for the central nervous system could be lifted hopefully about every 72 hours. So you try to give yourself a couple of days in between. Near maximal loads could be lifted more like every 48 hours. And then lighter loads could possibly be lifted, depending on how light you're going, daily, multiple times a day if you're doing some type of light rehab protocol. And how about the upper body versus lower body training? Well, for me, I'm concerned about what the athlete is or person is doing outside of the weight room. I think it's really common that individuals maybe anticipate training the lower body and the upper body equally. But if you've got a soccer player or a tennis player and they are just smashing their legs outside of the weight room, well, that may mean that you can sort of lift the ceiling a little bit on what the upper body can do for training. I also got to keep in mind that most humans are stronger with their lower body than their upper body. So a heavy upper body lift will not be as neurologically challenging as a lower body lift. On top of the fact that upper body lifts, you tend not to actually load the spine quite as much, such as a back squat or deadlift. And then that lower body training is going to cause a little bit more comprehensive stress on the body and the central nervous system. And so you might not train the lower body as frequently as the upper body. And on top of that, many athletes are also doing quite a bit of running. So you may just want to leave a little bit of space there for some recovery. You want to challenge them, but not necessarily smash them. Upper body, you can get a little bit more aggressive in intensity as well as frequency. And then single joint versus multi-joint exercises. Those single joint exercises are going to tend to be a lighter load. So our central nervous system is going to be spared. But with the single joint exercises, sometimes our lifters are isolating that muscle and attacking it much more aggressively than a muscle will be attacked on a multiple joint or complex exercise. So our single joint exercises can be stressful on the muscle, and the muscle may take 2 or 3 days to heal, depending on how aggressive the training was. Sometimes it may be longer, and sometimes you can feel that out. And it's okay to train while you're sore, but you want to understand that that may not be the best time to train aggressively or quickly. And multiple joint exercises are going to tend to stress the central nervous system just a little bit harder, as well as stressing movement patterns. So if we are training RDLs in a heavy fashion, not only is our central nervous system likely to be challenged, but we're going to have some sore muscles. And those RDLs that challenge the hip flexors and are going to fatigue the hip extensors and are going to fatigue the hamstrings and lead to some soreness and tightness, well, that may not be good to do before a high volume sprint day. And again, going back to one of our previous slides, if we're looking at the level of effort that we put on different training sets, Westside Barbell has labeled three different types of training sets as max effort, dynamic effort, or repetition effort. Max effort days for upper body and lower body days are separated out. So they will commonly do their heavy squats on Monday. That is their max effort squats on Monday, their max effort bench press on Wednesday. They will do dynamic effort work on Friday for the lower body and dynamic effort on Saturday for the upper body. And so what they're doing is not only are they spacing out so that the brain and the central nervous system can have more space in between these lifts, not only are they spacing those lifts out like that, but they're also alternating going lower body, upper body, and then lower body, upper body. So not only are they allowing the brain a little bit of extra time to recuperate between heavy lifts, but they're also attempting to spare the body and the joints by staying away from back-to-back days of training the same items. And then for their repetition effort sets, that's a little bit more common that's going to take place for their accessory exercises and isolated muscle groups. So those are not going to stress the nervous system quite as much. And so this can be done on a more frequent basis. And again, remember, they are training lower body on Monday and on Friday, and upper body on Wednesday and Saturday. So the repetition effort sets that they do in their accessory movements may make the muscles very sore, may stress the joints a little bit, but they're spacing out their days a little bit to provide some extra recovery. Remember, physical stress is cumulative. If we are going out to practice and doing extra push-ups because Susie or Tommy was late to a meeting, and we're doing extra push-ups and extra sprints and extra hills and all that stuff, well, going into the weight room and afterwards and performing a normal lift may not be the best idea. So sometimes as an exercise scientist, we know that with new stress outside the weight room, we are usually the ones to back off what we have. If we have athletes who are competing as well as training. If you have a 40-year-old overweight client at the YMCA and they're not doing anything else besides working out with you a couple times a week, you don't want to hurt them. You don't want to overdo it. You still want your training to be optimal, but your training for that individual can be optimal within the parameter that we don't really care how they feel. We don't really care how they feel when they're not in the weight room, because that's their biggest goal, and that's their only performance demand of the week, physically anyways. And keep in mind that stress is cumulative. So if you've got a demanding occupation, if you're training executives in a personal training studio or setting, and it's towards the end of a quarter or a fiscal year, and they may very likely be overstressed. They may be having extra meetings. They may be concerned about their company or the stock values or whatever. So their stress levels may go up. So talking to them and being aware of that, you may switch over from some heavy lifting or sprinting into more of a recuperation workout or sort of a feel-good workout. So sort of being aware of what's going on in their lives, whether work is stressful or they're fighting with boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, just knowing a little bit about what's going on in their life, because that stress that they get outside of the weight room will actually manifest itself physically. So that's called a psychosomatic relationship, is that our mental stress very quickly becomes our physical stress. And to tell a story from Coach Brian Mann, he was looking at, let's see, he's looking at the injury rates. And comparing it to the weeks of the semester. Okay, man. My handwriting stinks, but it really stinks on writing on the computer here. All right, so the scale ends up looking something like this. Okay, so let's look at a couple of points here. Well, what are these injuries about? Well, those injuries are kind of like that week one, everybody's coming back in, maybe they've been training, maybe they haven't, and they come back in and maybe it's just a little bit too much, or they weren't prepared, and sometimes just things happen up there. But Coach Mann, he claims that he didn't know what was going on here, but he's extremely smart, so I'm not sure about that. He claims he's not too sure about what the heck is going on in these 2 weeks here, and he starts asking around, poking and prodding, and he just figures out that this ramp up in injuries in the middle of the semester and this ramp up in injuries in the end of the semester, it doesn't have to do with competitions or training. It's midterms and finals. These are the weeks that stress in the classroom is so stressful, or it's stressful enough to the point that it's manifesting itself in the students' bodies and leading to things like ACL tweaks, ankle rolls, hamstring strains. And why is that? Well, it's just part of our body's system for managing stress. Is that we really we don't really disassociate between getting in a car accident or fighting with our girlfriend or boyfriend. We just stress is stress a lot of times. So we have to watch out for that and be careful. And it just has a whole system. It has a whole basically domino effect of it changes the hormone levels in our bodies. We're up late at night studying for those midterms or finals, and then we're getting less sleep, and then we're going and competing, and it's basically a vicious cycle. So keep in mind, all the stress is cumulative. And two factors of fatigue that we should know are central fatigue and peripheral fatigue. So central fatigue is basically when that central nervous system is a little bit off tilt. So whether that's because we just lifted heavy today or yesterday, or because we're fighting with boyfriends and girlfriends, or we've got bills that are overdue. And then peripheral fatigue is sort of everything else. It's, are you hydrated? Do you have enough energy? Have you eaten enough lately? Are you, have you just finished another workout? Where's your body at in just state of readiness? And for our purposes, both are very important. But I would say that central fatigue is going to be a little bit more complex. That peripheral fatigue, we understand that one needs to hydrate and to eat healthy and to take proper rest in between sets within a workout, and maybe perhaps within workouts on a given day. It's not really tends not to be beneficial or productive to go work out for 5 hours in a row. Maybe 1 hour in the morning, an hour at night, something along those lines. But we understand that the body needs rest, right? But that central fatigue, and I'm not going to read through that. If you guys want to read through that and pursue that link and some of this, you can pause it here and read through that. But essentially what's happening is that as our neurons fire, some of the waste left over from that reaction and from that process is going to slow it on subsequent firing. So, one easy way to see that is to go out and warm up, be safe, run some sprints, run a sprint, as quickly or nearly as quickly as you can, and then rest a little bit and repeat the process. And after doing that a handful of times, you're going to notice that no matter how hard you try or how much you've caught your breath, you're not going to be able to beat your top time from maybe 4 or 5 reps earlier. If you're in the weight room and you go to squat something extremely heavy, and then you wait 5 to 10 minutes, maybe you can get under it 2 or 3 more times and give it a good shot. But by the time you get into the 3rd or 4th time that you're trying to get under that bar, your body's just telling your nervous system doesn't want to get in there and have a max effort lift again for maybe the 4th time that day. And that's because of this central fatigue. All right, so let's kind of recap a little bit and try to apply what we've learned today. Okay, looking at one of our female college basketball players with an intermediate training status in the off season, in the preseason, and in competition, how often are we going to lift? Well, let's just go back and look at some of our parameters that we reviewed earlier. So let's see here. Nice. She's intermediate, so we're looking at 3 to 4 times. And in the off season, how often are we going to lift? Let's see here. This one says 4 to 6 times. So it's kind of leaning towards 4 times in that off season. What about preseason? 3 to 4. Yeah, that matches up with that intermediate status. And then how about in competition in season? 1 to 3. Okay, so maybe 3 is the magic number. And then again, depending on who your coaches are, who your sport coaches are, and what the schedule is, maybe you're not going to get that anyways. So these are all sort of factors to keep in mind. How about an NFL lineman? Advanced training status, and how often are they going to lift in the various seasons? Again, just using the charts that we have. All right, our NFL player is advanced. During competition, so in season, 1 to 3 times per week. I will say that I was able to get a little bit of experience in this field back in 2010 when the St. Louis Rams were still in St. Louis. I worked with them, and in season, they did have their big linemen lift 3 times a week. And the emphasis there was on maintenance as it's in season. So they were maintaining, not taking these, most of them are, probably the average age there was like 25. There was a couple of 30-year-olds. There was a couple of 23-year-olds. But taking these 25-year-olds who weigh 300, 330 pounds and taking them through an NFL season, which back then was 4 preseason games and 16 in-season games, and potentially going into postseason, hopefully, but looking at their ability to maintain that muscle mass and that body weight throughout the season. And what they did was they trained 3 times per week Not crazy intensity, but just they wanted to stimulate the muscle mass and maintain strength and size. And for the preseason in the NFL, similar approach. Still, they were playing about one preseason game per week, so it was kind of similar to the actual in season. So nothing too crazy or different there. And then I started with competition. Sorry, I started with in season. Okay, so let's go to off season. So I started here and went there, and now give me that off season. So for their off season, 4 to 6 times a week. Yeah, especially if you are if you're on the younger side. If you're on the younger side and you're maybe still trying to grow from your college body into your NFL body, lifting 4 times a week will probably and very likely do the trick. But it's also common that they're doing a couple of extra lifts in there. And not every lift needs to look like a big powerlifting session with bench, squat, overhead press, and pull-ups. Sometimes you may go in the weight room and just do some stretching and some extra core work, or just have fun and do some meathead arms. So 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 lifts per week for the off season for our big linemen who depend on their size and strength. That's very reasonable. Okay, overweight mid-40s male. Overweight mid-40s male. Okay, that doesn't really give us a lot of information. So if you're working at the YMCA or the local meat market gym, when that overweight 40s male comes in, you need to assess them and find out what they've been doing and where their training is. So maybe they were in great shape and training regularly 10 or 20 years ago, and they would have fallen into the intermediate or advanced group. But maybe they haven't trained in a long time, and so I would say that maybe mentally they are an intermediate or advanced lifter, but physically maybe they've gotten so out of shape and so deconditioned that you'd want to treat them like a beginner. There's nothing wrong with that. And honestly, if they're just getting back into it, they may not want to devote 5 days a week to it. So 2 to 3 days a week might be your sweet spot, both for physiological reasons and just for the mental state of that athlete. And it doesn't sound like they are too concerned about their seasons. So what I would probably do, again, in our off season, that's when we're trying to change the body. And it sounds like that 40-year-old overweight male wants to change his body, but we'd want to ask those questions, because remember, you don't want to put your foot in your mouth. And just because somebody comes in and they've got kind of a belly on them, you don't want to say, okay, how much weight do you want to lose? And then have them say, actually, I'm just here to, because I want to jump higher or something like that. So, you always want to gather information and ask questions. But for our purposes, let's assume that he's there for a physical transformation. And then we would kind of treat him like it's the off season. We're not too concerned about how they feel outside the weight room. Now, we don't want to hurt them and we don't want to scare them off, but our job is to help change their body and give them the results that they want. So we're going to push them, and we're not going to be too worried about their ability to play. They're not playing football or they're not cheerleading or whatever it is. So ask questions. If they're playing softball the next day or they play in like a weekend basketball league, ask those questions, and that can help us determine what stressors to put on their body and when. And yeah, we're not too worried about that either. So you take your 2 or 3 lifts per week, figure out if they've got any other activities that they're really worried about. Maybe they're not even mowing their own lawn, and we don't have to worry about anything aside from picking on them and then talking them into doing some recovery work in between our sessions. So gather your information and just kind of know your population. Okay, so that now we know a little bit more about the frequency. How do we go about that process of picking and choosing what exercises to give them. How do we get it from chaos to order? Well, I just want to start by bringing this up, and we're going to see this again. When we're talking about the training goal, whether it's strength, power for single event, power for multiple event, hypertrophy, or muscle gaining, or size increases, or muscle endurance, those all have been researched and are associated with different loads of a relationship to their 1 rep max, repetition ranges, set ranges, ideal rest periods, and for some of those, even an optimum time under tension. So knowing what the athlete's goal is and what season it is helps us derive what our training goal is going to be. And once we know our training goal, we have a little bit better idea of where to spend our time. And when it comes to the exercise order on a given day, I often think about almost like a wedge of cheese. And what I see here, I see that I'm kind of ramp up throughout the day in volume. My reps are going to jump up. And what's really going to happen is that sometimes I'm emphasizing the most important thing first. I have a priority principle. So I first saw the priority principle as a teenager, thumbing through one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's biographies. And he talked about having this big, awesome physique as a beginning bodybuilder. And basically his weakness was his calves. And once he realized that, he went home. He says he went home and he took out every pair of pants he had and he cut them all off of the knee so that he could never hide his calves. And then what he did was every time he went to the gym, the first thing, instead of finishing with calves, he would start with calves and he would smash them. And that's what he did every day that he trained calves. He did them first. It wasn't an afterthought. It was the priority. So when I think about a priority principle, I sort of think about what's your weak link, or what's the most important thing you can be working on. And for athletes, prioritizing power is not a bad idea. So that power movement is often going to be at the beginning of the lift for a couple of reasons. And one is, like we just discussed, it's a big priority. Our baseball players, volleyball players, cheerleaders, swimmers, badminton players, power is a big factor in sport. It's going to make a big difference. So starting your day off with power training is not a bad idea. And another reason that we might want to start with power training is that it's the most neurologically fatiguing. Central fatigue that we discussed earlier, that power training is going to be very neurologically challenging. When we're doing a box jump or a medicine ball throw, we're not always having a lot of time under tension to even allow for muscle damage to occur. And a lot of it is just the nerves telling those muscles to fire real quick, and then the muscle relaxes afterwards. So that power training, and again, what are you doing? You might be doing a clean, you might be doing a box jump, you might be doing a medicine ball throw. Well, these are kind of some of the most dangerous activities we do. So to start with them after a thorough warm-up, to start with them is not a bad idea, because you're going to have the most focus and attention of the day, basically, on those movements. And from there, moving on to strength, the reps tend to jump up a little bit. And the stress, and it's also extremely stressful. It's going to be most beneficial to do some of your strength training right away while you're fresh. You don't want your numbers to be watered down because you pushed it too far into the training session. You don't want to do your warm-up and then do some fatigue work. Everything should be, for the most part, activation based to not only leave us enough energy to do some good work with our strength training, but also to actually encourage the correct muscle activation during those strength movements. So if we look at the high performer and coach, Matt Wenning, spelled like winning, but with an E. Matt Wenning has created or popularized his own Wenning warm-ups. So on a squat day, you might do something like quite a few glute bridges and quite a few hamstring curls before going to squat. Well, conventionally, that sort of teaches us that we might be fatigued and we may not squat as well. But the rationale and the logic that he has is that we need to be fit and conditioned in order to get stronger. Maybe not to the point of running marathons, but adding more volume to our lifts is going to boost our work capacity and allow us to recover from heavy lifts and to do more heavy lifts on a given day. And then also, he really wants those muscles firing before you squat. Let's say you do a bunch of glute bridges and hamstring curls. Well, he wants those glutes and those hamstrings firing during your squat. And let's take a look. And as you go through that lift, what else is going to happen? Let's look at how those reps on a given day sort of pair with our other chart that we were looking at earlier. So our power reps are going to be 5 or less. Our strength reps are going to be 6 or less. Our complex accessories tend to be related to hypertrophy. You know, we may stay in that strength realm for another batch of movements, but we tend to start going into hypertrophy sets as we get into simple accessories like bicep curls, tricep extensions, hamstring curls. We tend to start to even lift higher than that. A little bit more hypertrophy, a little bit of muscular endurance. And then it's common to either finish with just an easy cool down or maybe do a hard finisher. And that hard finisher would be maybe a little bit more something high volume. So as you see, throughout, as we sort of move from one phase of the lift to the next, it almost looks like that little cheese wedge from earlier is that our volume rises. Well, that's sort of counterintuitive because you think a fatigued athlete, the volume of lifts should actually drop as you go. But you're probably not going to be doing as many sets of hamstring curls as you did of squats. So you can add volume in the reps because you're doing less sets, but also look at the neurological fatigue. We're starting with the most neurologically fatiguing movements in the beginning. And as the day goes on, we're getting less and less neurologically fatiguing. And this is just one way to do it. I have seen the power movements be moved to be trained after the strength movements just because of some simple logic and rationale is that strength is more important, or that coach was looking for a more of a strength aspect. I've seen power movements left over towards the end because of the logic that, hey, our athletes need to be powerful and explosive even when they're fatigued. Okay, that's pretty good logic, rationale. So it's not that this is the right way. This is a logical way, and to know why you're doing something is probably the biggest step that you can take towards developing your own philosophy and being able to explain it to other people. So you may use the charts that I'm providing, or you may end up choosing different charts of your own. But if you're able to create a system and have logic for it, then that's the most important thing. The most important thing is not agreeing with every single thing that I'm saying, but to learn how to defend your own programs and how to create those programs. And then looking at your exercise order, if you create a little bit of a catalog, just looking at power, what are some power movements? How about a clean or a dumbbell snatch or a box jump or a med ball throw? What are some strength movements? The squat, the bench press, the deadlift. We could do a leg press. We could do a rack pull. We could do overhead press. And then some complex accessories, so multi-joint movements that will help be key performance indicators and help develop some of our bigger complex movements, such as the RDL, the dumbbell one-arm row, glute bridges or hip thrusts and lunges, and then simple accessories such as single leg VMO, barbell skull crusher for the triceps, hamstring curls, a hollow rocks just to pick on the abs and the anterior core. And then some examples of finishers would be like a sled push race that should say relay, a little typo there that says relar. I don't know what that is, but let's say it says relay race. Yeah, having a team line up and they run out and grab a medicine ball and come back and then go out and get a plate, or just something kind of fun like that. You can line up the athletes and have them jump up on a pull-up bars and have them hang for time. Or you just put them on the wall and have them wall squat and see who wants to punish their quads the most and stay there the longest. So again, you can start to see how maybe there's going to be, from start to finish, there's going to be less neurological stress as you go along. But the volume and the time that you're spending per set may also be rising, and typically will. And again, this is just one way to skin the cat, okay? What in this program, what we're trying to present is a combination of science, experience, but also just how to produce logic and rationale. So it doesn't mean that everything that we're saying is correct or the right way to do it. But again, yeah, I just want to encourage you guys to learn what's being presented in this program, but also be developing your own philosophy. And if we're teaching you something that you are convinced is not for you, then that's still helping you develop your philosophy. But I would encourage you, if you're going to brush off or refute some of the stuff that we're teaching in this program, then have something to substitute it, have something to replace that, and have good logic for it. And if you can do that, you're well on your way to creating a good sound program and also being able to defend it and explain it. And I believe that is it. We will see you guys next time.